Hi everybody, welcome to Food Safety Fridays, edition 76. My name is Simon Timpley from the International Food Safety and Quality Network. Warm welcome to you all. I can see you already typing in the sidebar. Stuttgart, Colorado, Wisconsin, Chicago, Singapore. Well, you're all welcome anyway, and today's topic is implementing a food safety management system compliant with BRC. And today's speaker is Tony Connor from the IFSQN. It's great content, so I'm sure you'll get a lot out of today. I'd just like to say that today's webinars and the Food Safety Fridays webinars are sponsored by Trace Analytics, Metal of Toledo, AIB International, and Safe Food 360, who help to bring this program for you and get you some free education and certificate of attendance regularly. I'd also like to draw your attention to the sidebar. Those of you that are new, you can type your questions and comments in there. And also there are other tabs there, offers that will be popping in various things that you can do. For example, in there at the moment is the next Food Safety Fridays webinar. And also that's where we load your certificate, etc. And also the polls, we'll be running a poll today. So that will be in the sidebar. So get used to that. Do type in, say hello. Feel free to ask questions throughout and get to know the other registrants. And also let you know that today's webinar is being recorded. We follow up with an email within a few hours with the slides, a copy of the slides, the video recording, and the certificate if you don't get it today. All right. At this point, I'd like to introduce you to today's speaker, Tony Connor, who is from the IFSQN. Hi, Tony. Are you there?
Hi, Simon. Hi, everybody.
Nice to see you. And what's that lovely picture behind you, Tony?
Some sort of psychedelic elephant.
Right. Is it related to BRC?
I wouldn't think so, no.
No. Okay. And where you
more related to my location, I think.
Just remind the ladies and gents where you're located, Tony.
I live on Koh Samui, which is an island in the south of Thailand.
In a paradise island, the south of Thailand. Well, I'm in rainy Manchester, and it is raining today. Okay.
I thought it was hot and sunny there.
It was, but that was our summer. It lasted for about 3 days. So right. That's it for this year. Right, if you want to get your slides ready, Tony, I'll just tell the audience about the next Food Safety Fridays webinar we've got. Yeah, and you can see in the sidebar, that photograph is Jules Roger from FSSC 22000, and he's going to be here in 2 weeks, July the 7th, and he's going to be telling us about the updates to version 4. I'll be back for the Q&A later, and also I will be taking part in the poll. But for now, I'll hand you over to Tony.
Okay. Thank you, Simon. Welcome, everybody, to this webinar on implementing a compliant BRC food safety quality management system. We're going to start off with a poll. What is your current certification status? Already certified? Thinking about getting certified? Working on certification? Certified to another standard? Not considering certification at this time.
Yep, and I've loaded the poll in the sidebar, and I can see you're already voting. Question is, what is your current certification status? Already certified, thinking about getting certified, working on certification, certified to another standard, or not considering certification at this time. And it's quite a good spread, actually. We've got just over 40% already certified. And then it's quite equal between the rest, 13 thinking about it, 18 working on it, 15 certified to another standard, and 11 not considering it at this time. That's quite interesting. So obviously all the people who are logged on today are here for some reason, even if you're already certified, maybe it's to pick up some tips to improve. So what do you think of that, Tony?
Interesting that quite a lot of people are already certified, but I mean, there's no reason trying to improve.
Yeah. Okay, well, you're free to move on, Tony, yeah.
Okay. So, introduction to the BRC Global Standard. The BRC Global Standard for Food Safety Issue 7 defines food safety, quality and operational criteria a food manufacturer needs to meet in order to comply with customer and legal requirements. The key components to the BRC standard are Senior Management Commitment, HACCP system, Quality Management System, and prerequisite programs. The standard itself has 7 sections. Senior Management Commitment, Food Safety Plan HACCP, Food Safety and Quality Management System, Site Standards, Product Control, Process Control, and Personnel. Implementing the BR standard will usually involve the following steps. Learn about the BRC standard. Senior Management Implementation. Implementation of good manufacturing practices. Food Safety Quality Management System. Food Safety Plan, HACCP implementation and training. Product and process controls. Training. Internal audits and corrective actions. Management reviews and actions for improvement. And self-assessment and corrective actions. The BRC does offer resources itself. There's help and guidance on the website. There's a BRC Participate scheme, and there are training options. The BRC standard refers to fundamental requirements that are regarded as essential. We will go through the requirements that are deemed fundamental as we go through the presentation. Failure to comply with a statement of intent of a fundamental requirement leads to non-certification. That can be either an initial audit or withdrawal of certification at subsequent audits. This will require a further full audit to establish demonstrable evidence of compliance. Risk assessments. A word of warning about the standard here. A familiar theme in the standard is a requirement for risk assessments. There are at least 36 requirements to assess risk in the standard. Risk can be gauged using a scale of 1 to 3 or 1 to 5 and multiplying an assessment of the probability by the severity to get a significance rating. And then appropriate controls should be put in place to mitigate this risk. On to Section 1, Senior Management Commitment. It's a fundamental requirement. Senior management need to demonstrate they are fully committed to the implementation of the food safety and quality management system, meeting the requirements of the BRC standard and driving continual improvement. Senior management need to demonstrate clear commitment to meeting the requirements of the standard by documenting a food safety policy, documenting food safety objectives, conducting management reviews, having a meeting program, providing sufficient resources, communicating with all staff and ensuring that the site is informed of changes in food safety, legality and any new risks, and taking actions to improve. There should be an organogram which defines job function, responsibility, and reporting relationships of key staff. Staff with responsibility for statutory, legal, and quality systems should have their responsibilities documented. All employees should be aware of their responsibilities with respect to food safety and legality. Job descriptions should be available to a minimum for staff that can affect product quality. There should be arrangements to cover the absence of key staff. This can be reflected in the organisational chart by including nominated deputies. Work instructions should be in place and communicated to all staff involved in activities relating to product safety, legality, and quality. A fundamental factor in the management of food safety is a safety culture. For this culture to flourish and the importance of product safety to be understood by all members of staff, it needs to be led from the top of the organisation. So to Section 2, Food Safety Plan HACCP. It's a fundamental requirement. There must be an implemented food safety plan based on Codex Alimentarius HACCP principles. Section 2 requirements include that there's a multidisciplinary HACCP team. Prerequisite programs should be established, including cleaning, pest control, maintenance programs, personal hygiene, training, purchasing, preventing cross-contamination, and allergen controls. There are requirements for product descriptions, scope, relevant information to be obtained, intended use, process flow diagram, and verification of the flow diagram. There are requirements to identify and record all the potential hazards, conduct a hazard analysis, consider control measures, determine critical control points, establish critical limits, validate each CCP, establish a monitoring system, establish corrective actions, establish verification procedures, establish documentation, review the HACCP plan. So, a comprehensive food safety system should be implemented and maintained based on Codex Alimentarius HACCP principles, and reference should be made to relevant legislation and industry codes of practice. A full product description should be documented. The HACCP team should define the company's products and operational processes. Relevant information for the HACCP study should be collected, including legislation, known hazards, industry codes of practice, scientific information, and customer requirements. Sources of information should be documented, maintained, and updated. The HACCP team should identify the intended use of the products, including target consumers and vulnerable groups. They should confirm the scope of the HACCP study. They should draw a flow diagram from raw materials to distribution, including rework and outsourced products or services. They should verify the flow diagram by walking through the process and ensuring the flow diagram reflects the actual process in all hours of operation. The HACCP team should conduct a hazard analysis identifying all possible hazards, including those present in raw materials and those hazards likely to be introduced or survive the process that may not be controlled by existing procedures. That includes allergen risks. The team should determine the control measures required to prevent, eliminate, or reduce all hazards to acceptable levels. The team should justify and document how acceptable levels are determined. The team should identify which hazards need to be prevented, eliminated, or reduced to acceptable levels. The HACCP team should determine the critical control points. The decision tree can be used to determine critical control points. The HACCP team should establish measurable critical limits where possible based on legislation, scientific information, or codes of practice. The team need to validate each CCP to show that the control measure is capable of controlling the hazard within critical limits. The team should establish a monitoring system for each CCP to ensure it is being controlled within the limits. Each monitoring system should be able to detect loss of control of the CCP wherever possible so that corrective action can be taken to regain control. CCP records should be signed by the person responsible for monitoring and verified by an authorized person. The HACCP team should define and document the corrective action when critical limits are exceeded or the trend indicates a likely loss of control. Corrective action will include action required by the authorized person with regards to the products produced while the process was out of control. The HACCP team should establish procedures to verify that our HACCP plan is effective. This usually includes internal audit. Verification results should be documented and made available to the HACCP team. Documentation should be sufficient for the HACCP team to verify that the HACCP controls are in place and maintained. HACCP plans should include process step, hazard, control measure, critical limits, monitoring procedures, corrective action, responsibilities, reference to relevant records. HACCP plans and systems should be reviewed at a minimum annually, but also when there are significant changes. On to Section 3, Food Safety and Quality Management System. There should be a defined food safety quality management system that meets the requirements of the standard that is implemented, maintained, reviewed, and improved. Processes and procedures need to be documented for Food Safety and Quality Manual, documentation control, record completion and maintenance, internal audit, supplier and raw material approval and monitoring, specifications, corrective action, control of non-conforming product, traceability, complaint handling, management of incidents, product withdrawal and recall, customer focus and communication. The company should have a food safety quality manual which should contain methods and practices which meets the requirement of the standard or make reference to documents that meet requirements of the standards. The manual should be readily available to relevant key staff. The company needs to document and control procedures to demonstrate compliance with product quality, safety and legality. All documents in use should be the correct version and authorized. Documents should be in relevant languages, clearly legible, comprehensive and accessible. Records to demonstrate effective control of product safety, legality and quality need to be maintained. Records should be controlled, legible, genuine, authorized, and retained in good condition. The period of retention for documentation and records should relate to the shelf life of the product. There should be an audit system to ensure effective implementation of the food safety quality management system. The audit schedule should cover systems and procedures which are critical to product safety, legality and quality to ensure they are in place and in compliance with requirements. The audit schedule should be established based on risk assessments. All areas should be covered at least annually. Records of internal audit should be maintained. Conformity as well as non-conformity should be reported. Corrective action should be documented and verified. Internal auditors should be competent, independent of the area audited, and trained. In addition to internal audits, there should be a program of inspections scheduled to cover fabrication and hygiene. The purchasing process needs to ensure purchased products and services conform to critical product authenticity, safety, legality, and quality requirements. There should be procedures for approval, monitoring, and continual assessment of suppliers based on risk assessment. Purchasing procedures should include criteria for ongoing assessment and the standards of performance required. Records of assessments should be maintained. The company needs to ensure that appropriate specifications exist and are accessible to relevant staff for raw materials, intermediate products, finished products, and services. Specifications should ensure compliance with relevant food safety and legislative requirements. Specifications should be accurate, formally agreed, and authorized by relevant parties. Manufacturing instructions should comply with customer specifications. There should be procedures to investigate and analyze the cause of significant non-conformances which are critical to product safety, legality, and quality. Corrective action should be completed and verified to prevent further occurrence of non-conformity. Out-of-specification products should be clearly identified, labelled, quarantined, and handled according to the nature of the problem. Procedures for the control of non-conforming material should be in place. Decisions regarding non-conforming product must be made by authorized personnel. Corrective action should be implemented to avoid recurrence of the non-conformance. There must be a system in place to trace all raw materials through all stages of processing and distribution of the finished product to the customer with an appropriate timescale and the records maintained to ensure traceability. The system should be regularly tested, at a minimum annually, and include a quantity check and mass balance. Where rework or any reworking operation is performed, traceability should be maintained. Rework should not affect product safety or legality, such as allergen status, identity preservation, or ingredient declarations. Product complaints should be managed by a system that ensures they are effectively captured, investigated, and recorded. Trained staff should take actions appropriate to the seriousness and frequency of the problems identified. Complaint data should be analyzed and used to implement ongoing improvements and to seek to avoid reoccurrence. There should be a plan, procedures, and systems to effectively manage incidents, product withdrawal, and product recall. There should be procedures to effectively manage incidents and potential emergency situations that may have an impact on food safety, legality, and quality. This should include contingency planning for business continuity in the event of serious incidents such as disruption to services, fire, flood, or natural disaster, and including malicious contamination or sabotage. Procedures should be in place to ensure specific customer requirements are agreed and communicated. Customer requirements should be clearly communicated to relevant personnel. Customer codes of practices and policies should be briefed and available to relevant staff. On to Section 4 and Site Standards. There are requirements for external standards. The production site should be of a suitable size, location, construction, and design. There are requirements for security systems, layout, product flow and segregation, building fabric, utilities, equipment, maintenance. Requirements for staff facilities, chemical and physical product contamination control, foreign body detection and removal, housekeeping and hygiene, waste and waste disposal, management of surplus food and animal feed, pest control, storage, dispatch and transport. External standards. Consideration and controls are required for local activities and site environment, maintenance of external areas, maintenance of buildings. Based on the perceived risks, adequate security arrangements must be identified to reduce the possibility of unauthorized access to products. Precautions may include secure boundaries, site security gates, CCTV, keypad with restricted access, and locks on external tanks and pipework. Access to the site by employees, contractors, and visitors should be controlled, and all staff should be trained in site security procedures and encouraged to challenge unidentified or unknown visitors. Access to production and storage areas should be authorized. Fundamental requirement. The factory layout, flow of processes, and movement of personnel must prevent the risk of product contamination and comply with all relevant legislation. There are requirements for designation of product risk zones, site plan, contractors and visitors, movement of personnel, raw materials, packaging, rework and waste, high care areas, high risk areas, and ambient high care. Contamination risks should be managed by appropriate procedures and, where appropriate, physical barriers. Segregation should consider cleaning, product flow, nature of materials, equipment, waste, air, and utilities. There should be sufficient workspace and storage capacity to carry out operations hygienically. Transfer points should not compromise high-risk areas. Physical segregation is required for high-risk products, and high-risk areas should have a high standard of hygiene, fabric, and controls to protect the product. There should be a map of the site which designates area where product is at different levels of risk from contamination. Building fabric. The fabric of the site, buildings, and facilities should be applicable for its intended use. There are requirements for walls, floors, drainage for high risk and high care areas, ceilings and overheads, suspended ceilings, use of windows for ventilation, protection of windows against breakage, doors, lighting, protection of lighting, ventilation and extraction, and ventilation for high-risk areas. Utilities. Utilities should not represent a risk of product contamination with operational and storage areas. Utilities should be designed, constructed, and maintained and monitored to control any risks. Water, steam, ice, air, compressed air, and other gases that come into contact with the food or its packaging should meet legislative requirements and not represent a risk to product safety. The microbiological and chemical quality of utilities and gases that come into contact with the food or food contact packaging should be monitored based on risk. Equipment. There are requirements for design and construction, storage of equipment, food contact. Equipment should be designed for the intended use, and the risk of product contamination should be minimized when in operation. There should be access for cleaning, inspection, and maintenance. Certificates of conformity should be available for all equipment in contact with food. Maintenance. There are requirements for maintenance schedule, equipment inspection, temporary repairs, cleanup after maintenance work, high risk and high care areas. There's also requirements for food grade materials, workshops. A planned maintenance system should be documented and implemented. Plant and equipment critical to product safety, legality and quality should be covered by the system. Temporary repairs should not jeopardize the safety or legality of product and should be managed to ensure a timely permanent repair is carried out. There should be supervision of maintenance or repairs carried out by contractors. A hygiene clearance procedure should follow all maintenance work. Records should confirm product contamination hazards have been removed and the equipment is clean. Staff facilities. There are requirements for changing facilities, storage of personal items, segregation of personal items, high-risk changing areas, high-care changing facilities, hand-washing facilities, toilets, smoking areas, staff food, and catering facilities. There should be an adequate number of staff facilities for the number of personnel. Facilities should be designed and operated in a clean and hygienic way so as to minimize the risk of product contamination. There should be adequate changing facilities and adequate separate storage facilities for personal belongings. Adequate hand washing facilities should be provided at access to and at other appropriate points within the factory, including toilets. Hand wash facilities should provide an adequate supply of water at the right temperature, liquid soap, single-use towels or air dryers, hand washing instructions in a relevant language. Hands-free taps and hand disinfection should be placed in high-risk areas. Food brought onto the premises by staff should be controlled and not taken into storage, processing, or production areas. Catering facilities should be managed to prevent the risk of contamination of the product. High-care, high-risk operations should have a dedicated changing facility and procedures for donning visually distinct, clean overalls. Chemical and physical product contamination control. The risk of physical or chemical contamination of products should be controlled by the provision of adequate facilities and prevention procedures. Potential chemical, physical, and taint contamination risks should be identified, controlled, and managed. Prescribed contamination controls should be verified by regular audits. The standard specifically refers to controls for chemicals, metal, glass and brittle materials, and wood. Chemical control. There should be controls for storage and handling of non-food chemicals, the control of strong scents and taints. Metal control. There should be control of sharp metal implements such as knife control and staples, paper clips, and similar metallic items. For glass, brittle plastic, ceramics, and similar materials, there are requirements for an exclusion of unnecessary materials or protection. Register of brittle materials and checks. Breakage procedures and requirements for packing into brittle containers. The presence of glass should be excluded from areas where risk assessments have shown it to be a risk of contaminating the product. When this is not possible, the glass should be managed by protecting the glass and monitoring. Critical brittle items may need to be checked as often as at the start and end of each shift. The risk of product contamination should be reduced or eliminated by the effective use of equipment to remove or detect foreign bodies. The hazard analysis referred to in Section 2 should facilitate foreign body control. Potential hazards and the sources of those hazards should be identified during hazard analysis and appropriate control procedures put in place to minimize the likelihood of product contamination. Typical equipment to be considered may include filters, sieves, metal detection, magnets, optical sorting equipment, X-ray detection. There should be documented procedures for foreign body detection and removal, including the type, location and sensitivity, system monitoring, investigation of rejected material. Any foreign body control should be designed to provide the maximum practical protection for the product. Metal detectors and X-ray equipment. Metal detection equipment shall be in place unless risk assessments demonstrate that this does not improve the protection of the final products from metal contamination. Where metal detectors are not used, justification should be documented. This would normally only be based on the use of an alternative, more effective method such as X-ray, sieves or filters. There are also requirements for rejection mechanisms, documented procedures, checking procedures, and corrective action. Containers. Based on risk assessment, procedures shall be implemented to minimize the risk of foreign body contamination originating within the packaging container, such as jars, cans, or rigid containers. This may include the use of covered conveyors, container inversion, or rinsing with water or air jets. Hygiene and housekeeping. Housekeeping and cleaning systems must ensure standards of hygiene are maintained at all times and the risk of product contamination is minimized. There are requirements for cleanliness of premises and equipment, documented cleaning procedures, cleaning performance limits, training and resources, cleaning inspection and sign-off, cleaning equipment, effective operation of and maintenance of CIP, validation of CIP. Cleaning procedures should describe the item or area to be cleaned, responsibility for cleaning, method of cleaning, cleaning materials to be used, chemicals and concentration, frequency and cleaning, records and responsibility for verification. CIP activities should be monitored and maintained to ensure they are effective. Cleaning and housekeeping should be carried out by trained personnel in accordance with documented procedures, and records should be maintained. Cleaning chemicals should be fit for purpose and controlled. The effectiveness of cleaning and sanitation procedures should be verified and recorded. Waste disposal. There are requirements for licensing and legislation. External waste storage, unsafe and trademark waste. Systems should be in place to minimize the accumulation of waste in manufacturing areas. Waste disposal needs to meet legislative requirements, and records of waste disposal should be retained. Where appropriate, waste should be removed by licensed contractors. Surplus customer branded products should be disposed of as per customer requirements and the brand name removed. Products intended for animal feed should be segregated, protected from contamination, and managed as per legal requirements. Pest control. The whole site should have an effective pest prevention program. The program should minimize the risk of infestation. There should be adequate resources to quickly deal with any issues. There are comprehensive requirements for the program outlined in the standard. Storage facilities. There are requirements for documented storage procedures, storage of packaging, temperature control, storage in controlled atmosphere, storage outside, and stock rotation. Documented procedures to maintain product safety and quality during storage shall develop based on risk assessment understood by relevant staff and implemented. All facilities should be appropriate for the intended use and maintained in good condition. Procedures and standards to maintain product safety and quality during storage, loading, and distribution should be in place, including temperature controls, cleaning, segregation to avoid cross-contamination, correct storage, vehicle loading and unloading inspections, covered protective loading and unloading areas, adequate product security, and prevention of damage. Dispatch and transport. There are requirements for documented procedures, vehicle inspection, vehicle maintenance and hygiene, transport procedures including security arrangements, and third-party contractors. On to Section 5, Product Control. There are requirements for design and development, product labeling, management of allergens, product authenticity, claims and chain of custody, product packaging, product inspection and laboratory testing, product release. Product design and development procedures shall be in place for new products or processes, and any changes to ensure that safe and legal products are produced. There are requirements for new product development, approval of HACCP for new products, factory trials, shelf life evaluation. Product labeling. Procedures should ensure that product labeling complies with legal requirements and contains information to ensure the safe handling, storage, preparation of the product within the food supply chain or by the customer. For all product claims, including nutritional claims, there is a need to validate the product formulation and the product process are capable of meeting the product claim prior to launch, and to ensure that ingredient and allergen labeling is correct based on the product recipe. Management of allergens. It's a fundamental requirement. A developed system must be in place for the management of allergenic materials, which minimizes the risk of allergen contamination of products and meets legal requirements for labeling. There are requirements for raw material assessment. There are requirements for lists of allergenic materials. There are requirements for risk assessment for cross-contamination, including identification of potential points of cross-contamination through the process flow and assessment of the risk at each process step. There are requirements for cross-contamination prevention procedures, control of rework, on-pack warning labels, and allergen complaints. Equipment or area cleaning procedures should be designed to remove or reduce to acceptable level any potential cross-contamination by allergens. The effectiveness of procedures must be validated. The validation must be documented. Systems should be in place to minimize the risk of purchasing fraudulent or adulterated raw materials and ensure that all product descriptions and claims are legal, accurate, and verified. Processes should be in place to access information on historical and developing threats to the supply chain, which may present a risk of adulteration or substitution of raw materials. A documented vulnerability assessment should be carried out for all raw materials to assess the potential risk. Where raw materials are identified as being risk, appropriate assurance and testing procedures should be in place to reduce that risk. There should also be control procedures for handling identity-protected raw materials to prevent cross-contamination. These should be documented and implemented. When a claim is made, that claim should be fully validated and documented. Packaging should be fit for purpose, stored under conditions to prevent contamination, and comply with relevant food safety legislation. When purchasing or specifying food contact packaging, the supplier of packaging and materials should be made aware of any particular characteristics of the food, for example, pH or usage conditions such as microwaving. Product inspections and analyses, which are critical to confirm product safety, legality, and quality, should be performed using appropriate procedures, facilities, and standards. Personnel to undertaking analyses should be qualified and trained and be competent to carry out the tasks required. On-site laboratories need to be designed, located, and operated to prevent risk to product safety. Where the company undertakes analyses which are critical to the product safety or legality, the laboratory or subcontractors should have gained recognized laboratory accreditation or operate in accordance with the requirements and principles of ISO 17025. Products should only be released by authorized personnel when all agreed release procedures have been completed. On to Section 6. Process control, where we have control of operations, labeling and pack control, quantity control, calibration and control of measuring and monitoring devices. Control of operations. It's a fundamental requirement the site shall operate to documented procedures and work instructions that ensure the production of consistently safe and legal products with the desired characteristics. These should all be in compliance with the HACCP Food Safety Plan. Labeling and pack control. Fundamental requirement. The controls of product labeling activities should ensure that products will be correctly labeled and coded. One of the most common causes of withdrawals and recalls is incorrectly labeled products. Requirements include allocation of packaging materials, production line checks, packaging controls, and online vision equipment. Checks should be made at the start, during, at the end of each run, and when there are changes. Checks should include verification of any printing carried out at the packaging stage, such as date coding. Quantity control. There should be a quality control system which conforms to legal requirements in the country where the product is sold and any additional industry sector codes or specified customer requirements. Calibration. The site should identify and control measuring equipment used to monitor critical control points. This should include a documented list of equipment and its location, identify code and calibration due date, prevention from adjustment, protection from damage. Section 7, Personnel. There are requirements for training, personal hygiene, medical screening, and protective clothing. It's a fundamental requirement. All personnel performing work that affects product safety, legality, and quality are demonstrably competent based on training, work experience, or qualification. All personnel, including temporary personnel and contractors, should receive training prior to commencing work and be adequately supervised. Appropriate training and documented supervision monitoring procedures need to be in place for personnel engaged in activities relating to critical control points. A program of review of staff competencies should be in place and the necessary training provided. There are specific requirements for initial training and supervision, critical control point training, a training program, allergen training, training records, competency review. Personal hygiene standards should be developed to minimize the risk of product contamination from personnel and be appropriate to the products produced and operated by all personnel. There are specific requirements for a documented personal hygiene policy, hand washing, cuts and grazes, metal detectable plasters, personal medicines. Medical screening. There are specific requirements for illness notification procedures for employees and visitors, and a documented infectious disease procedure. Protective clothing. Suitable site-issued protective clothing should be worn by employees, contractors, or visitors working in or entering production areas. There are specific requirements for a documented protective clothing policy, availability and design of clothing, laundry, protective clothing for high risk and high care areas, changing protective clothing, and protective clothing that cannot be laundered. So, in summing up, the BRC Global Standard consists of an arrangement of requirements for Senior Management Commitment, Food Safety Hazard Plan, Food Safety and Quality Management System, Site Standards, Product Control, Process Control, Personnel. In the PDF summary of the webinar, we have provided some useful links . Finally, we'd like to inform you that the IFSQN offers a BRC Food Safety and Quality Management System implementation package. The package includes the documents you have seen in the presentation and contains over 80 comprehensive food safety management system procedures, food safety record templates, a HACCP manual, laboratory quality manual, training modules and exams, an implementation workbook, verification and validation record templates, allergen management module, supplier risk assessment tool, product development module, complaint management guidelines and analyzer, and free online technical support via email. That's the end of this webinar. Any questions?
Okay, so questions related to the content. There was lots of questions throughout, and some of the members were actually answering. So let's try and pick up now. Charissa, how would you class a plant processing fresh and shrimp? High risk or high care?
Are they cooked? If they're cooked,
Fresh.
then they're likely to be high risk. Were there any other questions on zones and risks?
I'll have to scroll down. I'm scrolling down now to try. If you did post a question before, repost it so it comes near the top, because there was a lot of comments. A lot of people were asking, are the worksheets available or not? The PDF's available of the PowerPoint presentation, but not for free, all the documentation. Let's see. There's a question about traceability. Does BRC require traceability for packaging materials from suppliers?
Yep.
This is a requirement for...
Yeah, all raw materials, including packaging. I mean, recall might be because of a faulty pack, such as something that won't seal. So it's important to have traceability of the packaging as well as everything else.
Yeah. Okay. Human has said, do we need to document all 36 risk assessments?
Yes. I mean, some of them can be as simple as one-liner. So one line in Excel, what you do. I mean, they might be covered by prerequisite programs.
Right. Okay. Okay. Osama has just posted a comparison between BRC and SSC. In terms of the requirements, I know they're different standards, but broadly speaking, do they cover the same topics, FSSC and BRC?
They all cover the GFSI requirements in the benchmark document. Where they vary is the extent of the specified requirements. So BRC was the first standard approved by GFSI. It was originally a technical standard in the 90s. And so it's the most established standard, and I think it's got the most requirements. And so the figures seem to show that it's still the most popular standard of all the GFSI benchmark standards. But it's quite stringent. There's a lot of requirements in there. There's far more requirements in the BRC standard than there is for the FSC 22000 scheme.
Okay. NK Weckham saying, can we build a comprehensive ISO 22000 system compliant to BRC?
Yeah, I mean, it would be slightly different in that your ISO 22000 system will have operations a requirement of 22000 that is not requirement of BRC. But BRC wouldn't be worried about that as long as you control your hazards. And in ISO 22000, it says you need to validate your operational prerequisite programs. So I don't think there would be a problem with that, and it could be compliant with BRC. It would just need to cover the additional requirements in BRC compared to ISO 22000, which doesn't actually specify that many requirements in terms of prerequisites, whereas the BRC standard is full of prerequisite requirements.
Yeah, okay. Ahmad is saying, on what basis can we classify raw and packed materials for high-risk materials versus low-risk materials? So how do you classify raw and packed materials, high or low risk? On what criteria do you use? I think
in terms of risk for what?
Raw and pack materials.
Raw and packaging for...
Yeah, raw and packaging.
I don't really understand the question unless it... I mean, some raw materials you might classify as high risk because of high risk of adulteration or substitution. They might be high risk because of the final product they're going into. So the risk might, there might be a risk of the raw material in the first place in terms of it being contaminated or adulterated or substituted. And then there might be a risk related to the final product.
Yeah. And for packaging, I suppose if it's direct food contact packaging coming into contact with, that's high risk automatically, rather than like a pallet or a cardboard outer box or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, Human saying about sanitation validation. Can you elaborate on sanitation validation? Just a few ideas.
Yeah, okay. For food contact services, if your product is of a highly sensitive, high-risk product, you want it to be clean and free of pathogens. So to validate that, what you would do is you would use a system that you're going to use to verify the clean, so maybe an ATP swab, but also a traditional micro swab. So to validate your clean, you would do your traditional swabs and your ATP swabs together and verify an ATP level that would say that your equipment is clean when you verify it, but you've also validated that the clean has cleaned the product surface sufficiently for it to have removed pathogens or contamination.
Okay.
Yeah.
Georgia, does BRC still stand for British Retail Consortium? I think somebody said last week that it's been bought out or something. As far as you know,
but it's still BRC anyway at the moment.
At the moment, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And they was asking, does the employee need to know what BRC means? I wouldn't have thought it was being non-conformity if a shop floor employee didn't know what BRC stood for. I wouldn't have thought so. No requirement.
No, they just need to know how to do their job related to food quality, safety, and legality. They don't need to know what every initial stands for in food safety terminology.
Yeah. David's asking, what training is required to undertake BRC internal audits?
Well, the audit team leader should in fact do a external, typically a lead assessor course, and that can be 3 to 5 days. Internally, you can do your own training or do an online training course. So the internal auditors themselves can do an online or internal auditor training course, but the audit team leader needs to be comprehensively trained.
Okay. Latif, should we have HACCP documentation for each material we buy from suppliers?
You'll need a specification. You'll need to know what's in it. So in terms of HACCP, you need to, it's about product description. You need to have a description of the raw material with sufficient information for you to conduct that hazard analysis.
Okay. Carlito, which standard is highly acceptable by GFSI? Well,
all their benchmarks standards will be acceptable.
Yeah. Ahmed, why OPRPs are not included in BRC?
Because OPRPs are unique to ISO 22000.
And although this is BRC, do you know the difference between a PRP and an OPRP?
Are you asking me? Or
I am, yeah.
Okay. Prerequisite program is a generic thing that controls generic hazards. In ISO 22000, you find that you've got severe hazards or significant hazards, and then you decide whether they should be part of the HACCP plan or the operational prerequisite program. In doing that, you need to decide how easy it is to monitor. So let's say something like a filter in a pipe that can only be checked at the start and end of production. Now, because you can't monitor it continuously, In ISO 22000, that will probably be an operational prerequisite program rather than a CCP and controlled in the HACCP plan. And for an example of a CCP would be, say, pasteurization with automatic continual monitoring, so that any second that it's outside the critical limits, the plant will divert, and that's controlled to, within seconds, whereas a filter in a piece of pipe might be controlled on a chunk of 24 hours production. Did that make sense?
I think so, yeah. It was Mona that asked. Did that make sense to you, Mona? Just say yes or no. I'm sure it was correct. Whether it makes sense or not is a different matter. Dave says, will the B of BRC be changing to Brexit instead of British? Very topical joke.
No, it might stay. I think it'll still stay British.
Yeah. Is it acceptable, Irene, is it acceptable to have no CCPs in the BRC HACCP?
It is possible, yes. That you'll need to show and demonstrate how you've come to that decision, and show how any hazards you've identified in your hazard analysis are controlled.
Okay. I think after we're 8 minutes over, we could go on all day. If there are any more questions that come in, I can always forward them to Tony, and we can follow up. There's nothing that Tony doesn't know about BRC, whether that's food packaging, storage and distribution, or any of the other GFSI standards. So you can ask your question.
We're all learning every.
It's true, actually. Well, yeah, but you are the font of all knowledge related to that. And if you do have a question, you can always ask on the forum, on the discussion forum. And just to say again that those manuals are available on the website, and they're very, very comprehensive and come with support from this guy, Tony. So all the way to certification, he'll help you out and give you guidance and advice, and that's worth a heck of a lot of consultancy. So do check them out if you're in need of developing a system, or you're partway through, or you're stuck. Okay, it's a very cost-effective way to do it. Right, Tony, thanks very much for your input today. Extremely valuable, lots of content, and I'm sure it'll be a useful resource for them to refer to that PDF and watch the video again later. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Bye, everybody. Thank you for coming.
Cheers, Tony. Right, ladies and gents, the certificate is in the sidebar. Please, you can download that. Remember, you go to Dropbox, you can either print and sign it yourself, or you can open it in a package such as Paint that you get with Windows, and just type your name in. Carlos, no, it just applies to the BRC, that discount at the moment. Okay, so I'll follow up with an email with the video, the presentation, the certificate, and I'll also link to the store, to the manuals. If you have a question, post it on the discussion forum, and I'm sure Tony will answer it on there. Okay, I'll see you in 2 weeks with the FSSC 22000 version 4 with Jules Roger. For now, have a nice Friday, and have a great weekend, and I'll see you soon. Take care.